delivering late at night.
Hey guys, after reading tons of stories here, I remembered one of my own. This might not be as intense as some of the other stories here, but I thought I would share regardless. This happened a year ago when I was working as a pizza deliverer. I often worked late at night, and despite other women being sexually harassed on the job every now and then, I never felt very nervous when delivering. Anyways, this happened at around 11 p.m. I was delivering to a house, and as I arrived, I parked out front. Now, there are two things you should know from here. One, the pizza is on the passenger's side. And two, this is an Australian derelict suburb. So I get out of the car and immediately notice this 20-something-year-old guy standing on the opposite side of the road, facing me. This being a derelict area and me being rushed, I thought nothing of it, as it's not too uncommon to see derelicts hanging around the streets. But as I started walking around the car to the passenger's side, I found him behind me. He asked me what the time was, and I said it was about 11-ish. This still didn't have me on edge, as I was used to this kind of stuff. But as I was opening the door to get the pizza, a jolt of suspicion came over me as I noticed he was still behind me, not saying anything. Looking back at it now, I find it unnerving how subtle this feeling was and how close I was to ignoring it, but I'm glad I didn't. I, while trying to act nonchalant, quickly closed the passenger door, walked around to the driver's side, hopped in, locked the door, turned on the car, and put it in drive. I felt like I was being overly cautious, but sure enough, he pops around to the side of my car. At this point, I feel pretty safe and, dare I say, proud in my decision making, so I cracked the window to get to the bottom of this. Guy, do you have the time on you? Second time he's asked this. Me, it's 11 o'clock. Awkward pause. Guy, can you please give me a lift? I need to go to my friend's house and it's where you're delivering. What? Me, no. Guy, well, I know whose pizza that is. It's my friend's down the road. I'll show you where it is if you can give me a ride there. The conversation went on, but you get the idea. This guy was persistent. I eventually told him to get out of here, and I was calling the police. I closed the door and started dialing. As I was speaking to the police, he started yelling and banging on the window really hard. Thankfully, he eventually left and the police came and searched for him while I delivered the pizza. Stuff like that happened every now and then, but despite most of it just being immature sexual harassment, I thankfully learned to be alert whilst on the job. I don't know what he wanted, but I'm glad I didn't find out.
How I almost lost my mom.
Being from a third world country, you see a lot of shit happening all over. You never think it's gonna happen to you. After all, you're careful. You know better. You mind your own business and everything is gonna be 5 by 5. My mom is one of the strongest women I know. She is one of 15 siblings, which I think toughened her up and made her a woman of strong morals and a no-nonsense attitude. She is one of the oldest of her siblings, so she has that nurturing mama bear thing down. She'll take crap from no one, and when confronted with fight or flight, she'll fight every single time. Like the one time my mom was picking up my sisters from kindergarten and some asshole tried to snatch her purse. She took notice of him walking towards her with no good intentions, and she told my sisters to hold on to her skirt, and when the man made his move, she just pressed her thumbs against the man's eyes and scratched him wherever she could reach him. She's gotten mellow later in life, but for me, she is still the epitome of love and strength. This is the story of how I almost lost my mom to road rage. I was 10. It was a Sunday and I had gone to the swimming pool with my friends. My dad was supposed to pick me up at around 5 p.m. By 7 p.m. I was fuming, angry, and decided to walk back to my house. It is probably a 20-minute walk. I got home and was mad, and my sisters were scolding me because it was dark and dangerous for a 10-year-old to be walking back on his own, and that dad had gone to pick me up like 5 minutes ago. I didn't care. I was pissed off. I just walked into my parents' room to give my mom a piece of my mind because I couldn't tell my dad off, and I found her sobbing and in distress. I asked her what's going on. She was angry at my dad and she didn't want to talk to him again. My anger faded away and curiosity striked instead. Turns out at around 4:30 p.m., when my dad was going to come pick me up, he was coming back from his farm and some dude cut him off. And Dad, who unfortunately has some road rage, honked his horn, pulled down the window on my mom's side, and yelled a bunch of obscenities. The dude in the other car lowered his window, pulled out a gun, and started shooting at my dad's car. Dad hit the brakes and let the other car pull further away. They stopped and got out of the car to catch their breath, and that's when my mom saw a hole in the space between the passenger front door and the passenger back door. A bullet barely missed my mom's head, and she was hysterical. They got home and my mom broke down and Dad had to calm her down. Thus, he was pretty late for picking me up. It's probably not as scary as some of the other stuff people post here, but the thought that I may have lost my mom at age 10 scared me shitless. It's been 20 years since that day, and sometimes it randomly pops into my head, and I have to talk myself off of that ledge when I wonder, what if?
Blank, hollow eyes while he moved around me.
This might not be your typical encounter, but it chilled me to the core. It is actually the main reason I no longer work in the industry, though I tell people it was the hours that made me quit. This happened when I was doing nightclub security in the UK. I was just chilling on the front door. I see a fight happening with a guy chasing another down across the street, and I am like, oh well, it happens. 99% of the time they just shout a little bit and try to intimidate one another and go get a kebab and puke. Mainly they just look to make the other person think that they are going to fight. Think peacocks shaking feathers at one another. This time, however, the guys got into a tussle against a parked car, and pretty quickly the chase down guy was down for the count and passed out after some hefty blows. At this point, I need to intervene. It has literally been seconds since the start of the fight, but they are across a very busy one-way street, so I try to stop the car so I can get there on time. Feels like hours, but I get in between them. Aggressor guy is really only kicking the other guy's head over and over, full force as he lies on the ground. Realize he might die. Like, why am I getting into the middle of it, but I can't help it? I get in between them, shout at the aggressor to stop. Luckily, guys don't often want to fight girls. I am ready to defend myself in any case. He makes at me like he's going to start kicking me too, and I brace myself to block any strikes. He grins and books it up the road instead, and I can focus on the guy on the ground. I try to give him first aid, stop the bleeding. His face is just a hole basically, so it's pretty hard, and the back of his head is gone too. I know of the old, if you need someone in a gathering to phone an ambulance, you need to choose a person and give them direct orders, not just ask in general. So I ask, more like bark an order at, the only guy around I see with a phone out to call 999. His eyes are blank and he holds his phone still. It's like in a nightmare when you yell to draw attention to something, but no one can hear you. I tell him again, nothing. Again, nothing. I start shouting, raising my voice. He needs to call an ambulance. Guy is dying. He needs help. I realize, by the way the guy is moving around, that he is filming us, probably trying to get a good shot of the guy's face as he lies dying by me. I feel like I am in Black Mirror. Eventually, someone else phoned, and I haven't seen any YouTube clips from that area or a rough date, though I have looked. He might have taken it down. My incessant shouting at him and asking what is wrong with him might have deprived him of some likes or something. I don't know what happened to any party. I am going to court soon for the assault/attempted murder, but I'm not sure what the charge is. I'm pretty sure the injured guy made it out. I never saw anything about it in the news, which is a good indicator. He might not have been so lucky though. I am sure he stopped breathing just before help arrived. I just pray that if something happens to me or someone I care about, bystanders will call for help instead of trying to capture suffering on film.
Creepy photographer.
This happened about 7 years ago, when I was around 19. I was somewhat of an amateur model, though not really all that invested in it. However, I did the occasional shoot for a friend and whatnot. Through my Facebook, I got an offer for a paying gig. It was a message from a person I didn't seem to have any connections with. I have to admit I was flattered, but still wasn't that interested and told him so. After telling him several times, he ended up offering me a price nearly 5 times more than his initial offer. At this point, I admit I was seeing dollar signs, and after all, it was only a few hours' work. Come about a week later, after countless daydreams of what I could buy, I decided it was worth it. Also, I want to note that it was established that there would be no nudity whatsoever. So we set a date and made arrangements. We were to meet in 2 weeks' time. Those 2 weeks went by fairly slow and uneventful. Then came the day of. That morning around 9, he messaged me again with his contact details and more details of our meetup. With this came the first red flag. The phone number he gave was an email, not a phone number. And he told me to text only, that it was his only way of contact. I found this pretty weird, but I guess at the time it wasn't odd enough to question. Again, I was seeing dollar signs, so I was a bit foolish. So I text him when I arrive at the spot, which is a huge park. We were to meet in the parking lot of a little cafe and then walk into a more scenic location. This also meant a more secluded location. Now, a lot of parts of this park are really private and covered with different trees and bushes. For the most part, people stay on the grass parts or the walkways. He arrived 5 to 10 minutes later, and he didn't really come off as creepy or intimidating, and was only 5 or so years older than me, so I felt a little relief. This relief was short-lived, as we went about as deep into seclusion as possible. Red flag number 2. But it was daytime and I still wasn't feeling too uncomfortable. He sets everything up for the shoot and brings out a bottle of wine from his bag. He pours 2 little plastic cups and says we should drink a little first to loosen up. This was red flag number 3. I watched his every move as he poured the drinks and he didn't seem to do any tampering. So after he took his first gulp, I decided to take a sip, pretending to drink more than I actually was. After talking a few minutes, he'd finished his cup, and now it was noticeable that I was faking, still having 3/4 of my cup, so I decided to actually take a few big sips and say that I'm ready to start. The shoot goes normal for the first 30 minutes, then he decides it's time for a second round of wine. Again, I watch him as he pours, and again I wait till he starts drinking. So again, I try sipping to be polite, drinking as little as possible. After drinking another half cup, about another 5 minutes of talking, I said we should get back to the shoot. This time he seemed a bit annoyed and tried to prolong our break as long as he could, but after realizing I wasn't going to finish my cup, he decided to start again. After what felt like a few minutes, I started feeling drowsy. I'm not really sure how much time had passed, but I felt like both time and I were moving really, really slow. Things gradually got creepier. He had convinced me to unbutton my shirt all the way down, though still on and wearing a bra. Things were getting hazy, but I remember waves of feeling really uncomfortable. Then he talked me back into feeling calm. Then he started touching my body, guiding my hips to the position and direction he wanted. After guiding my hips several times, he kneeled down, ran his hand to my butt and lifted up. While he did this, he sniffed my crotch. He didn't even try to make it quiet. He really sniffed. And at that point, I freaked the fuck out. I immediately started stumbling away, shirt still open. He made no attempts of following me though. I made it all the way back to my car after what felt like the longest walk ever. I felt sick and woozy and tired, really tired and numb. I texted my friends where I was and what happened. They told me they were on their way and not to drive, but I really didn't want to sit and wait there of all places. So I told them to meet me at a school that was about a mile away. I drove pretty crazy, especially considering I was likely drugged. However, I made it unscathed. My friends arrived shortly after and drove me home. I went to sleep and didn't really even fully explain what had happened till the next day. Needless to say, everyone was horrified. All of my friends told me that I should go to the cops, and in hindsight, I should have. Here's why I didn't. In those days, I was a bit of a partier. Not too crazy, but careless enough to be sure that there were drugs already in my system. I was an avid smoker, with the occasional harder drugs on the weekends. So really, I was afraid that there would be evidence of that to the police, which was enough to deter me. Basically, my lifestyle kept me from informing the police or my parents. That and I felt ashamed. Long story short, his account was deleted shortly after and all I had was his lousy email phone number, which didn't help as at the time none of my friends and I were very tech savvy, though one friend mentioned how he likely had to be connected to Wi-Fi to have service to text me. So we kind of thought that that meant he lived close or he had been at a place close by with Wi-Fi, though that was pretty much where our investigation ended. Now that I'm older, I realize how blissfully ignorant I was. I also cringe at thinking what I was willing to do for a couple $100. At least I made him pay me half up front. My one smart move, I suppose. Definitely one of the creepiest things that has ever happened to me. I still get goosebumps whenever I think about it, and the fact that he probably repeated his actions with someone else, or worse, and is likely still out there, terrifies me.